Welcome to Next Level Thinking, Episode 5, Militarism and War Propaganda. In this episode, I discuss in depth the issues, how it affects you, and some solutions. For this episode, I'm using a new format, the one that I talked about in the previous episode. I'll be going over the problems, how it affects you, and solutions. I organized this before I start recording, and I organized this episode much better than previous episodes, so I shouldn't go on one topic and then to another and then to another topic, but it'll be more organized and will flow more naturally. So for the first topic is the general, philosophy of the justification of war, which is might makes right. And then later during the colonial times, it was called social Darwinism. Might make right is the philosophy that those who are more mighty should decide basically the fate of other human beings and should get to control them, which is essentially the entire philosophy of war and militarism. It is also called social Darwinism, based off Darwin's theory that the stronger should dominate the weaker. This is a flawed ideology because while this may be true for the animal kingdom, us as humans are much different from the animal kingdom. We are evolved from that more reptilian or otherwise animalistic survival-based, instinctual only philosophy. We have evolved to be a social species and to communicate with each other and cooperate peacefully, although you can see this in animals too. You can see symbiotic relationships between animals as well, but the human species is not animalistic completely to the point where we only care about survival. Survival is a part of our natural instincts and anatomy in our brain, but we were designed to cooperate peacefully together. And if you look throughout history, societies that have cooperated with others have prospered greater than those who simply just took whatever they can. As you can see, the fall of many empires, while it may be prosperous for a certain period of time to just conquer as much as you want, take whatever you want, screw everyone else, that philosophy will lead to your downfall eventually. You can see that with the Roman Empire. You can see that with Hitler and Nazi Germany. You can see that with Stalin and Soviet Russia. All these empires based solely off of violence have fallen because they're faulty and not sustainable and completely evil. And they do not understand basic human relationships and anatomy, that we were designed to be a species that cooperate peacefully. And if we all cooperate peacefully with each other, we will all prosper and it'll be sustaining. The total war theory is another philosophy of war, and it's the idea that every civilian part of the economy should focus on the war effort, which is essentially what is going on often in America, but also other countries in the world. A lot of the things that I'll talk about here may not apply to your country or culture, but it can still affect you. And oftentimes, just because it applies to America doesn't mean it doesn't apply to other countries. But total war is the theory that all parts of the economy should focus on the war effort. And that's kind of what you have going on here in America, that a very large part of the job market is to support the military and war, which don't really benefit in any way because most of the military is not used for defense, it's used for offense. And all these offensive wars are just causing more issues, which I'll get later on into in the video. And one of the big issues for soldiers, or I should say veterans, is PTSD, but many people don't consider why soldiers are getting PTSD. I believe that the PTSD could not only be from watching their fellow soldiers die, but it could also be the fact that they feel guilty for the actions that they do, such as murdering innocents, and also from supporting a system which deep down in their subconscious they know is wrong, and it causes mental problems when you are doing things against your conscience continuously. Even if you were trained or indoctrinated to do something against your conscious, your subconscious will still feel that it's wrong, and it could cause you to get PTSD, I believe. That's just one of my theories. And the sad thing is that if you get injured as a soldier, either physically or mentally, to the point where you can't fight, they basically just dispose of you and force you to leave, and you may not even get the benefits that you were promised, such as education or occupational training or whatever benefits that you signed the contract when you enlisted. That's mostly just to get people into the military. There's statistics that show that like only 30% actually get the educational money that they signed for, and there's very strict requirements in order to get those benefits that are in the basically the fine print of the contract. Just kind of part of the manipulation to get people in the military without realizing that the benefits aren't really as good as people would believe them to be. And the thing is, there's always going to be another person willing to become a soldier, so they can just easily replace you just like that, which is kind of sad to see all these soldiers come home injured and mentally broken, and the government basically just discards them and treats them terribly. And I'll go into more in other ways that they treat them terribly. I mean, I understand like that when you go to become a soldier, you have to realize that you're going to become injured probably, and like I was mentioned before, there is mental issues that come along with participating in those kind of acts, which are immoral, or just seeing others die. It does have a real effect on your body and psyche, which is one of the reasons I wouldn't recommend joining the military in the first place. And according to one story too, there's army recruiting call centers. They'll try to coerce soldiers. Well, they'll try to recruit new recruits. They'll try to recruit new people, and they'll sign basically, I think it's like a temporary contract or something, but it's not a full contract, and they'll try to threaten them with like arrest or coerce them, saying if they don't show up to the recruiting center, then they'll be arrested. And it just shows that they want to coerce people to get into the military at the recruiting centers, which is just completely messed up, because if you're signing I forgot what it's called, I think it's like a temporary contract, then you don't have to follow up with it. You can cancel at any time and decide not to join the military. It's mostly just a little agreement specifically for the recruiting process, but not the actual joining and enlisting process. One of the tactics of recruiting is to shame people into becoming soldiers as well, and I have a source for that. And there's many ways that I guess you could say war propagandists try to get people to join the military using both positive and negative reinforcement. Another thing is, from what I've heard of veterans, that the officers and military leadership is cruel, that they basically will, like the drill sergeants, will just degrade the soldiers that are joining, which just shows you how much they really care about soldiers. And the drill sergeants think they're God, and they treat them like crap, yell at them. I think I've even heard them physically abuse those who are under them, which shows just the brutal hierarchy in the military structure, and just shows the abuse. I don't know why they would be so abusive, how that would help with the recruiting process, but it's one of the flaws of the military hierarchy, at least in the United States. I think a lot of that also comes from just ego of wanting to show or prove that you're better than those who are below you in the hierarchy. That is true for also a lot of hierarchies, not just the military, of course, as well. Another one of the problems of the military is the destruction of natural resources and how it wrecks the global economy. Well, not only does the military itself require a lot of resources, such as like iron, bauxite, steel, and other natural limited resources. All resources just about limited, but which of course would increase the demand of those resources, which increases the price of resources such as iron and bauxite, steel, etc. But it also wrecks the global economy by increasing prices and by destabilizing the economies of other countries. That would also raise global prices, and you can't really have trading in the middle of a war. Like if you think on a battle zone, how are you going to trade with somebody when you're firing bullets and others? Like you can't have trading in a war zone or a battlefield zone, whether it be like a town or a city or a country. If it's a complete war zone, the civilian part of the economy is not going to be able to trade on the global market with others, which is going to cause price increases, because those in the town, city, or country are not going to be able to sell their products that they normally sell, which would decrease the the supply of that product, which will increase the demand and therefore increase the price on the global market of the products of that city or town or country. And really, basically, all soldiers are mercs. People will say that the mercs are an issue, and I understand where they come from. They can be an issue because of the fact that, well, the same reason that I have problems with soldiers is the things that they do. But if you ask me, mercs are actually much better than soldiers because at least they aren't being funded by theft, taxes, so that's better. But all soldiers are basically mercs, really, because no soldier would fight if there was no pay, and not just based on patriotism. A lot of them will say that patriotism is the reason they join, and it's an aspect, but I guarantee you wouldn't see many soldiers, very little soldiers, maybe even none, would fight if it wasn't for at least some sort of pay, compensation, benefits, etc. that they get. You just wouldn't see it. And also the military uses the medal system to pay soldiers less and also to get the soldiers to do the bidding of warmongers by instilling a false sense of pride, and it gets them to want to do things besides just the money and the patriotism. They want to feel like they're higher up in the hierarchy, basically, and it gives them another reason to commit the atrocities that the military does as well. Religion is also a big reason for war, maybe not as much as it used to be in the case of the NATO countries like America and Britain, but for example, in ISIS, the Islamic Caliphate, religion is a huge factor in the reason of their war, at least ostensibly, or, up front, it seems that way. And one of the reasons why they're so radical is they have a radical religion, and their religion, they believe everyone else is wrong, and those who do not submit to their religion or convert must be executed, which is actually one of the things that I think I even seen in the Quran, but I know most Muslims don't follow that verse literally, or they think it's metaphorically, but of course, ISIS is a fundamentalist militant group, so they're going to follow it, and that is how they execute it. You also see this with Israel. Israel uses religion as part of their justification for war. Zionists, or the militant radical Jewish people group, they feel that they must conquer all of Palestine, at least the Israeli homeland, historic homeland, and also other territories surrounding it they must conquer, and it's all based on the Torah essentially and religion. But many countries historically have used religion for war. Some major ones include like the Crusades or like 30 Years War, but there's many reasons for war, and one of the biggest ones out in history has been religion, or at least it appears to be religion. Another one of the issues is that politicians and war profiteers don't pay the cost in war. The soldiers and the innocents that they murder and the taxpayers are the ones who ultimately pay the price for war, and instead the politicians and war profiteers get approval, money, and votes. And then those who profit from war decide if we go to war. And you could imagine why there is always a war, and throughout almost the entirety of United States history, there's always been a war, because those who profit from war, they're going to decide to go to war. They'll find a war so they can make their profits. Politicians will oftentimes say they're against war because it's a popular idea with people, but then they change their mind when elected because of war lobby money, and of course they can profit themselves. Maybe people might think that politicians don't profit from war, but they're some of the biggest profiteers from war because of lobbyist money from the military-industrial complex. Soldiers don't want to disarm because they don't want to lose their jobs, and so some soldiers believe that war is necessary to keep their job, because if there wasn't any wars they wouldn't have their job, which is another one of the issues. And Hermann Göring, basically the right man hand of Hitler, or Hitler's second in command, he said, naturally the common people don't want war, but after all, it is the leaders of a country who determine the policy, and it is always a simple matter to drag the people along, whether it's in a democracy or a fascist dictatorship or a parliament or a communist dictatorship. Voice or no voice, people can always be brought to the bidding of their leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them that they're being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same in every country. And he was also this was one of his explanations for how the Nazis were propaganda during the Nuremberg trials. Frederick Bastiat said, when goods don't cross borders, soldiers will. And blockades and embargoes, which are enforced by the military, cause many innocents to die from starvation, such as Yemen, in collaboration with the United States and Saudi Arabia. The embargoes and blockades, many will say, such as neocons and imperialists, which you also see them on the left or the liberals, so it's not just a left or just a right thing. This is just warmongers, I will call them. They'll say this is to stop the terrorists in their country or the military and the tyrants in their police state, but it actually causes many innocents to die and is not an effective way to stop a dictatorship. It just hurts the many innocents, which are most of the people in even in North Korea, for example, most people are innocent. That's embargoes and sanctions don't really help, because in dictatorships and tyrannies, it's a small ruling over the many, and sanctions and embargoes affect the many who are innocent more than it does affect the few who already have all the wealth to afford the food and luxuries, so it doesn't really hurt them, it only hurts the innocents. And you can't really end foreign tyrants by bombs, because you have to consider the collateral damage, and civilians will just support a new tyrant because they still believe in all ideology of the tyrants, such as in like North Korea. If North Korea was to be invaded and you took out Kim Jong-un and all of his nearest elite friends, it would just get replaced because they'll elect a new tyrant, because they literally worship Kim Jong-un and the North Korean state, and they'll want to see another tyrant take control of their country. So that's one of the issues, that invasion doesn't really help if the people are indoctrinated and brainwashed to believe that the leader is legitimate and is to be respected in an almost godly way or extremely revered. And it's one of the necessary tools actually to have a tyranny long term, is to have people worship and revere and respect the leader, not based on fear but genuine respect, not based on force but worship. The United States is basically created and literally funded ISIS and the Mujahideen. You can look it up. It's called Operation Cyclone. And, you know, if the government didn't fund these terrorist groups, or what they'll call moderate rebel groups, which literally behead people, these are moderate rebels and they behead people. It makes no sense. These are terrorists and the government's funding them because they're a little bit less terroristic than ISIS, because they don't chop off as many heads. And it's just absolutely absurd. It's like lesser two evils. It just makes no sense. Why would you do that? The United States funded the Mujahideen because they believed they were a lesser two evils versus the Soviets. And I mean, look what it led to. Funding of the Mujahideen led to the Taliban, because with all the support from the United States and Western nations, they were able to fight off the Soviets. And then you saw the spread of radical militant Islam because of the funding of Mujahideen, which splintered into many different radical militant Islamic groups throughout the Middle East. In reality, if the government didn't fund terrorists or these moderate or these rebels, there wouldn't be almost virtually no terrorism in the Middle East to worry about. And of course, if they didn't bomb them into oblivion, which caused them to become more radicalized, and young men will feel like they need to defend their homeland, which will cause them to become more militant radicalized. And it's just, I mean, literally the United States, based off of their funding of terrorists and their imperialism cause, is, well, itself terrorism. It's pretty much where terrorism comes from. Like when Trump said Obama created ISIS, people were shocked, but it is kind of true in a sense that the policies of people like Obama, Henry Kissinger, Madeleine Albright, and Hillary Clinton essentially created all the terrorist groups that you can think of today. A lot of the radicalized militant Sunni or Shia groups in the Middle East. There's also a video that shows the human toll of just the war in Iraq, and it is absurd how much that just shows you the true cost of war more than anything else, is just the massive amount of deaths that it causes. I mean, that's the greatest cause of them all, and just so many of them are literally just civilians. It's completely innocent. I would also consider, most of the soldiers fighting innocent as well against the United States is unpatriotic, it might sound. I mean, if our country was invaded from, say, like China, though, you gotta think, would we be terrorists or would we be defending our country? You have to think of it in that sense. And, I would do the same if, at least I would consider doing it if, say, China were to invade the United States. I would be upset, and if they started bombing and just completely destroying the country, I would be upset too. I might even join in resistance to China, because I don't want to be, bombed into oblivion and just be controlled and enslaved like that, like the military does to the Middle East. I don't want that happening to me. So, you can't really blame some of them. I mean, I'm talking about the people who rebel against the United States imperialism. I'm not talking about the terroristic militant groups who want to control other innocent Muslims. I'm talking about the innocent, like Muslims or those from the Middle East who fight against the USA because they want to defend their homeland. Another thing people need to understand, though, is that all wars basically are banker wars. Banks fund both sides of war, and so do their industries. War industries will fund both sides of war, and I'll get to the industry part later. One example is Libya. The reason that Gaddafi was killed and overthrown was because he refused to use US dollars to sell oil from Libya, and he wanted to get his country on gold instead of United States dollar, and that's why they believed that he had to be overthrown. The warmongers believed that he had to be overthrown. But you can see one of the major reasons for all the imperialism in the world is to set up a central bank controlled by the International Monetary Fund, so global bankers can control the economy and the people of the country using inflation and debt, such as giving loans to countries at high interest rates, and then they have to pay those loans back, so that country is basically enslaved by the global bankers. And it's one of the major reasons for war, possibly even really maybe even number one really, is to just set up central banks, IMF banks, to control and enslave the people in that country. There's also a great video by Art Pasiel that goes into the cult-like aspects and the indoctrination of the military. And I haven't found much information on this topic, but I will say it's very interesting, and he shows how the military will use uniforms and try to distance them from their family, and trauma-based mind control, it's called, to basically break the soldiers down mentally so they can build them up to become an obedient soldier who does not question and thinks no emotions and is psychopathic, maybe, even though they did not go into the military with a psychopathic mindset. That's really disturbing, but they try to make them that way through various techniques, and Mark Pasiel's video goes over that, and I have a link to that one. And I know this one might be controversial, but we should not support the troops when they kill innocents. Plus, I mean, ultimately all soldiers support a system which causes people to be murdered, even if they do not do it themselves. And they also accept money from taxes, which is theft and immoral, and it supports that immoral system as well. And that's one of the reasons we have these wars, is because the support the troops propaganda. They say, I mean, I don't support the war, but I support the troops. But who carries out the war ultimately? It isn't the politicians, really, if you think about it. They order the troops, but who are the ones who drop the bombs? Who are the ones who are causing the children to be mutilated? Who is the one doing that? Who's the one shooting them? It's not the politicians. They aren't physically doing anything. They're absolved partially from their crimes, but real blood, and it's one of the reasons why they get PTSD, and the real blame is on the soldiers, because they're ultimately the ones who commit these acts, is the soldiers. And the excuse of just following orders wasn't true for the Nuremberg trials, and it's not true now, and that's just the facts. But it is sad, though, that the troops are just nothing but cannon fodder for the rich and powerful psychos. I mean, that's really what it is. They don't care about what happens to soldiers after they are in the military. They're just cannon fodder. And you can see with the terrible VA system that doesn't care about veterans, and the fact that they break their promises on the educational opportunities and benefit cuts, and that's just shows you how much they really care, because they of course, as I mentioned earlier, they're always going to have more people, and then if they don't have more people willing to join the military, they could always draft. So I don't really care what happens to you in the military. That's one reason not to join. They just don't care about you. There's no personal benefit. If you're a purely selfish person, the worst thing you can do if you're a purely selfish person is to join the military. They don't care about you. They just don't. And war itself is really, I mean, it's a racket. This Major General Smedley Butler, he was the highest rated decorated Marine of his time during World War II. And he goes out in his book, which I have linked free online. It's very short. It's really more like a long article. But he goes into how war is a racket. It's just a secret operation to make profits that many people just aren't aware of. And if you've read this book, wow, he would really know what's going on, and no one would ever certainly join the military or support it. I mean, this is just what it's all about. It's all about control and money. He says it's more about money, but I always believed it was about control, and I think that's what it's for. Just economic control of people, and just control is what it's all about. Another war propaganda technique is the military brainwashing in schools. You can see this through JROTC, for example, or, even standing for the national anthem could be considered that to a lesser degree. But they want to get people indoctrinated and believe that the military are heroic and they're protecting them, and they don't ever tell you about the war crimes. They'll never tell you about innocents being died. I never heard any of this from school. And I even took advanced classes in school, not just the regular old courses. So, I mean, you're just not being taught any of this, and it's almost lying by omission, and it's giving a very false sense of the military. And it's not a heroic thing. It's not like it is in the video games and the movies. It's brutal. It's horrible. Innocents die, and that's the reality of war. And people just don't know that because all they know is from videos and movies, but they just know it from movies and stuff, and watch and look at the pictures of those who suffered from war. It is a grim topic. You might be able to tell my voice, and I just can't believe some of the things that the military has done. And nationalism and false patriotism support is one of the biggest things that supports war. I shouldn't say nationalism, because you can be nationalist and not support war. So I shouldn't say that. I should say false patriots. People, if there was a war, they'd support it. They wouldn't even care if it was a made-up country or whatever. It wouldn't matter to them. They would support it because they want to help their country and support it. But this is one of the reasons so the support of war is this false sense of serving the country, and the belief that it serves and helps the country. It doesn't. It destroys the country completely. It is really the most anti-American thing in the world is imperialism, because, I mean, we just look at the Washington's farewell address. He says no entangling alliances or into be friendly with other countries. I mean, this is not what's going on. This is clearly against everything the founders of this country believed in, and there was no invasions for the early part of American history, besides maybe a little bit in Canada during the Revolutionary War, but that was only a small, just a very, very small part of the war. But basically there was no aggressive wars until after 1812 and like the Civil War, really maybe even up to the Civil War. You see, there wasn't really any aggressive wars. Well, sort of. I mean, like the very, very early Americans, what I'm talking about, like from say 1776 to 1812, because you can argue the Indians in that war, I suppose. There's also a video that shows there's a collusion with the conspiracy of a proven conspiracy though, of video games and movies being used to spread war propaganda, and it's just insane, like to see games like Call of Duty or America Proving Grounds, games being used to promote the military, and it just gives this arcadey feel and vainglorious aura to war. And like I said, it's brutal, it's dirty, it's innocents die. There's this variant of war does not exist even. That's illusion of what is shown in video games and movies. And I mean, I play a lot of video games. I've played a lot of war video games. I know it's just completely made up. It's just a game, and that's not real. And I've watched a couple more war movies as well, and it's not real. You have to understand that it's not real. It's propaganda. One of one of the biggest ways to justify a war is using a false flag, and that's where a government will fake an attack in order to justify a war. And I have links to several examples. One example is Operation Northwoods, which was a failed one, but it's a proven one, that U.S. soldiers disguised as Cubans were to, I think, do some violent act in Florida, and that would be used to start a war with Cuba during the Cold War. So there are so many examples that I have, but false flags is where like a government will attack their own ships. That's usually the common thing, and they'll say that the enemy did the attack, so they need to fight that enemy. But you look at it, it wasn't the enemy, it was their own country doing the attack. It is also necessary to dehumanize the opposition in war. And you can see this in comics during like World War II, where it shows Germans and Japanese as monstrous creatures, or they won't look human, or at least quite human. And it's necessary to make your enemies inhuman, because if your soldiers don't think that the enemies they're shooting at are human, then they won't feel guilty and they won't be reluctant to hold bullets back. And I think there were statistics that show that only 10% of the soldiers during World War II on the Allied side actually fired at soldiers. And it just shows that people, deep down, they feel guilty about going to war. They don't feel it's right. But one of the reasons they go is because of false sense of patriotism. And some people do it because they're down on they're in an economic depression, so they join the military because they believe they'll get finance, they'll get a good wage and benefits and things such as that. But another thing that a lot of people do not know about is Operation Vigilant Eagle, and it's literally the government saying we hate veterans who are against war and tyranny, because the government knows that they could use their intense military training to stop them from implementing that tyranny, and they know that they have to keep an eye on veterans who oppose tyranny and war, because like I said, they know that they could literally physically fight against the government from implementing those policies. And there was a case of a guy who was actually arrested and tortured because he was a veteran against threat. I think it was something he believed that was immoral that the government was doing. And they'll say that Operation Vigilant Eagle is to prevent violence. Also, the government will say if you're not doing anything wrong, you have nothing to hide, then why is there secret military bases or even hidden underground or underwater military bases? Well, you got nothing to hide. Why are you hiding so much? It doesn't make any sense. And I've heard some of the things that there's in these secret military bases. There's extraterrestrial technology or communication devices with extraterrestrials. Or I think according to this one guy who was in just a part of a military underground secret base in Sweden, he said on just some of the lower but not the lowest floors of the military base, there was weapons even more powerful than nuclear weapons. And I mean, there is some seriously powerful weapons, way more powerful than nuclear weapons. I mean, nuclear weapons are old at this point compared to some of the technology that I've heard about the military having. And, most of that's even kept a secret, complete secret. Like, I don't even know some of the things, but it's insane. In a lot of the industries that were American supported both sides of the war, like you'll see IBM and Ford use their industry to support not only the Allied war effort, but also the Nazi war effort, or I guess the Nazis' extermination plan in the Nazis' case of IBM. But it shows you that, these industries don't have an allegiance to a country. They'll support wherever their money goes, and they don't care which country they support in their industry. Though it should be noted that Ford did eventually stop helping the Nazis, but IBM didn't, and Ford did it up to a point, but he should have saw the Nazis becoming tyrannical. I mean, just their ideology was tyrannical. I don't know why any industry or businessman would support what the Nazis believed in, but you could even see in Time magazine, he was man of the year, Hitler was man of the year. Like, Hitler was wrong from the beginning. And I know say hindsight is 20/20, but I mean, seriously, how could you not see that? I just don't understand. But really, there aren't any good guys in war. That's what people don't understand. I mean, there's a lot of war crimes that are committed by the Allies, like Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombing. That was cruel and many innocents died, hundreds of thousands, and that was on the Allied side. And the bombing of Tokyo and the bombing of German cities, hundreds of thousands died from those bombings. I mean, the idea that the Allies were the good guys is just completely wrong. Both sides were wrong. That's the reality. Both sides were murderous and evil. You could argue that the Allies were less murderous and evil, but I mean, that's just the realities of what happened. And one of the justifications for war, and it's just the most backwards logic ever, is the broken window fallacy. It's the idea that if, say, a gangster threw a brick at a window, then the business would have to repair the window, which would help the glassmaker because the glassmaker would get money from the store that had their window broken. But people don't consider, well, if the window wasn't broken, what would that store owner could have used that money for something else? And I have an article on this as well, but that's basically the gist of the philosophy, which is, can you really even call it a philosophy? I mean, it's just like, destroy things, it helps people. That makes no sense. You just destroy everything and it helps the economy. Well, I don't even want to be part of that economy, if they even call that an economy. But, it's not economical at all. It's destroying someone's property is the antithesis of economics. I mean, that just doesn't even make any sense from a common sense standpoint. But I have more information on that if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of it. Another thing is embargoes and sanctions create war. Because if you can't get another country's resources peacefully, then some countries will be like, they'll just say, well, if we can't get them peacefully, we'll have to invade you. Because we want your resources. We want them no matter what. But if you had no economic control, or if you were allowed to trade freely, because it's much cheaper to trade than it is to war, then the country they would have just instead traded. So, and another thing is it's called the Project for the New American Century, and it shows an outline of countries that the United States military is trying to invade, and it's been accurate so far. And I mean, you can just see there's the list of countries that the United States wants to invade, and I think the last one on the list, and this is the big one, is Iran. The reason that Iran is big is because, well, we pretty much, it's known that they have nuclear weapons, unlike Iraq, which is one of the false justifications for war, is that they believe they had nuclear weapons, although having nuclear weapons yourself wouldn't make you a bad person. They just believed. They just believed that they had nuclear weapons. But they knew in advance they actually didn't, secretly. This uses a justification to tell the public in the media that was going to be used to justify war with Iraq. But Iran actually has nuclear weapons. They also have a massive army compared to any country just about in the Middle East. Except for maybe Saudi Arabia and Israel, a couple 100,000. It would be a very long, bloody war. And it's also a very mountainous region, too. So it'd be similar to in Iraq getting bogged down, or Vietnam getting bogged down and never ever winning the war and costing just unlimited amount of money and soldiers on both sides as well. And another cost of war is a statistic of 53% of the federal government spending goes to the military. And that's just confirmed. That doesn't include black budgets, or what they're called SAPs. And I mean, imagine what else that money could be spent for instead of just basically it's just a giant black hole that it also hurts people. I mean, that's what basically the military is. Most of it anyways. I mean, it's all of course based on theft, the whole government. So, I mean, that's just immoral as it is, the what it gets, just the spending process of it, but also what it's used for. And I know I didn't mention this really up in this podcast so far. I know people will say, what about defensively? Yeah, I mean, defensively, it's fine if you have a military, but it needs to be funded off voluntary or contribution or donations, and not be based off a conscription. You would be willing to join, and it'd be purely defensive. I'm perfectly okay with it. I think that would be a great idea, actually. It'd be nice if we had that. I think we would actually feel safe, or at least safer. I mean, there's no such thing as safety, really, but we feel much safer instead of funding all these terrorists and blowing them up and causing more terrorists because of blowback theory. And I mean, it's basically just like a hydra. You cut off one head, get two heads, That's basically what is going on with blowing up the Middle East. The warmongers and the soldiers that basically are the creators of terrorists, essentially, really. And another thing is you'll see different government organizations funding different militant groups that oppose each other, such as the Kurds fighting for the CIA and the Turkish rebels funded by the Pentagon. And these groups oppose each other, and then they fight each other. As you can imagine, if you're funding both sides of the war, you're going to be funding them for a long time. because one side will fight, then the other sides get funding, and it just a stalemate, and it's just a massive black hole of money, and nothing ever changes. Another thing that embargoes, sanctions, and economic prohibition does is it increases organized crime, which increases crime, not just, terrorism, but it also increases crime. So all of these embargoes and sanctions create a massive black market. And, I'm fine if with some of the black market things. I mean, like, I should say the gray market, which means the gray market is like when you illegally do trade, but it's for moral things, such as like if you illegally traded food to another person when it was illegal. But what it creates is a giant black market. And Frederick Bastiat said, as I said before, if goods don't cross borders, soldiers will. Free trade makes others dependent on the well-being of others so that they may profit, so that we may profit more, and so will they, and we wouldn't want to war them. That was a quote I found on the internet by someone anonymous. What the Iraq War was mostly for is oil, although it wasn't just for oil, but that was a huge one. And the war in Iraq was for drugs, and that goes back to organized crime. I mean, 90% of the opium in the world is made in Afghanistan, and it increased the production of opium, increased by, I think it was like 3,000% after the invasion of Afghan. You can see soldiers guarding poppy fields, and that just shows you, why people wonder why certain drugs become more prevalent because of the United States invasion of Afghanistan and the guarding of the poppy fields, because it was banned by the Taliban, poppies, the production of opium, basically. So that also increased the organized crime as well. Many people in the United States also are suffering from addictions from opium, opioids, I should say, is because of the war in Afghanistan. As crazy it might sound. Another one, as I said before, is to establish central banks in the United States, global petrodollar currency, such as in Libya. And there's an acronym for what is wars for? Wars are for God, gold, oil, drugs. And it's pretty much true for the most part, at least in the modern age. Another thing the military is being trained for, they're actually being trained for to turn on civilians. And that might sound like a conspiracy theory, but there's actual proof that this was done before. During Hurricane Katrina, the military was going around in Humvees and trucks taking away people's firearms, which, I mean, that's just doing that in America. You might as well be literally the devil doing that. And I mean, if you're doing any country, I would consider you absolutely evil. But I mean, that's just one proof that the military is being trained and then used against you, or at least it could potentially. I'm going to the next part of this podcast. The organization was kind of messed up, I'm not gonna lie, but I think the flow was much better in this episode. You can let me know, but I kind of messed it up because I did the organization after I wrote the notes and set up before. I didn't set up the organization before the notes. Anyways, how it affects you and why you should care. And that was began with the Jade Helm and the Katrina confiscation, as I was talking before. The military tech is also used against countries of their own civilians, such as there's I think a Pentagon program, maybe it's DARPA, that shows how military tech can be used against citizens. And actually is, if you look up targeted individuals, DARPA military tech is being used against certain rebellious individuals to shut them down, basically, even physically, to stop them from saying anything against the government, essentially, or whatever corrupt industry or whatever issues they feel that is wrong with society. And I'll have links to that one as well. That's not even in the notes, just talking about that. Another thing a lot of people don't know is that United States is the largest polluter in the world, and there's proof of this in a source that I have, but just an example. All those nuclear bombs that were tested in the Pacific not only caused a massive amount of pollution, but many of the people on near islands that are literally American citizens as well. I mean, if it's anyone, I would consider it evil and crime. But it's even being used against Americans, the nuclear bombs dropped in the Pacific Islands, in Micronesia, for example, the Micronesians who, like say near Guam, have an extremely high cancer rate compared to the rest of the United States, and that's because of the nuclear bomb testing, and it's the largest polluter in the world is the United States military. And so one of the ways people don't really realize how military can affect them negatively. I mean, it affects the environment, it affects, not just those in local areas, but, I mean, just look at also the effects of Fukushima, of almost the entire globe. The nuclear weapons and bombs also can affect global climate change. You never hear that in the media. You always hear all those things about global warming that are just complete nonsense. Like, you drove your car, that means you're the most evil person in the world, or you went on a plane, most evil person in the world, that is nothing compared to what the government has done to pollute the earth. Some of these same people, too, are supporting the insanity of some of the climate change nonsense. Not to say that climate change isn't real, it's very real, but, government's one of the biggest reasons why it's going on. But you'll never hear that from people like Al Gore. War also hurts global consciousness. You have to imagine the whole world as cells of one large brain. And if violence is done against one cell, or, one cell is harmed, all of the whole brain's harmed, because they're all connected. That's how you have to think about, when you see, innocent children and men and women getting murdered, it affects everyone in the whole world a little bit. And you can see proof with 9/11, a traumatic event, but many 9/11s go on in the Middle East every day. People don't realize it, or, maybe on a smaller scale, but, it was 3,000 people approximately in 9/11 estimated, which is a lot. But, these little crimes against humanity done abroad affects everyone, the whole world, negatively, You have to think about it that way, and have proof of that as well from a source. War also increases global prices on goods, especially oil, which, oil is very important for most people to have a low price, because if oil prices go up, it really hurts a lot of people, citizens in the economy. And the reason that oil goes up is because you need oil for war, a lot of oil, almost everything. You need oil for all the vehicles in war, just about everything in war you'll need oil for. Another thing is, if you're a male in the United States, although in some countries it depends, but almost all countries have a draft or conscription, and all men that are registered for selective service are essentially slaves to the government. You could be enslaved if the government needs more soldiers. They'll say, you must join, or otherwise we'll jail you, or they might even kill you. But they haven't done this since Vietnam, but I'm saying that they could, and this could affect you. I would highly recommend not supporting an absolutely monstrous, nefarious, diabolical system. I would go against it in any way you possibly can. And then I'm moving on to the solutions section. One of the ways you can do is stop supporting industries of war, such as Raytheon, Northrop, Gundam, Boeing, even to a lesser extent, or Harris, by not purchasing their products and services, and to stop yourself and others from working in those war industries. Of course, quit the military, and teach your children not to join the military, and show the true brutalities of war and how it really is, not as it's shown on the media. And I don't believe in withholding children from the brutalities of war and such. I don't believe in keeping children, and I think they should be taught the truth and not be lied to or hold back just because there's children. They're going to find out eventually, and if they don't, they need to find out so they don't get fooled into joining a system which is just absolutely monstrous, such as the military. So teach them not to join, and encourage friends and family to not join if they're in the military, and tell them to quit if it's possible. It can be difficult, but it is. Just try to get them to, is what I'm saying. And another thing is to try to pay as little taxes as possible, because it goes toward the war machine and its industry, the subsidies. So try to do that. Conform alternatives to the military based on land defense. Remember that, such as militias, private armies, arming yourself. That's an alternative. That's what the Second Amendment was creating for, is to basically not have a need for a standing army, which is what we have right now, which is where you have an army funded for extended periods of time. And, the longest it was supposed to, according to the Constitution, was, I think, 2 months, or was it 2 years? We've had the military for many years. The military in the United States was originally only supposed to be for temporary. The real military was supposed to be the Second Amendment, basically. The citizens holding guns on themselves and defending themselves against invasions and threats, foreign and domestic. That was the military and all these people who act like the military is constitutional is completely unconstitutional. And I mean, I'm not a constitutional person. There's some bad things in there as well, but the military is completely un-American, actually, just the existence of for longer than 2 years. It was against everything the founding fathers believed in, was standing armies. I mean, they said that it was used to control and enslave the people, and they didn't want to invade all these countries and stuff, and they saw the issues of that, what happened in Europe. And yeah, so that's one of the solutions, is to form militias and having private armies, which are like more professional armies, and companies could be paid to protect the country. Another way is to expose the military industrial complex and war crimes via either making your own media or, just talking to people around you, exposing it. Another thing you do is to not vote for policies and politicians that support war or its industries. If you ask me, better off not voting at all. Actually, voting itself could be considered violence in often cases. I would just really, really not going to recommend voting ever at all. I don't see how it's legitimate forcing your opinion on others against their will. People should be able to do whatever they want as long as they don't harm others. Just bottom line. And just because a majority vote on hurting a minority does not make it right. And Albert Einstein said, the pioneers of a warless world are the youth that refuse military service. And that's what you have to do. And the thing is, those who work in the military and the industry behind it can be just simply easily transfer their jobs and their skills to constructive jobs that will help the greater prosperity of all people, although it can be difficult, but it's to be done because it's just an evil system and it needs to have its support cut. And then by putting them in these jobs, we would all be more prosperous and make more money. And then, don't forget how war hurts prices, the global economy, and causes inflation. I didn't even mention that part. I thought I had that in the notes, but war causes a massive amount of inflation because it causes debt go up, and then more debt there is, the more government has to print money, and that causes more inflation, and that's the reason why prices go up. One of the biggest reasons is because of war. It might not sound related, but if you look in the sources, that's how it is. War causes inflation. It's the reason why prices for everything goes up and seems so high is because of inflation, or what is often called the hidden tax, or the very expensive tax for sure. And another possible solution is by Major General Smedley Butler, as I mentioned earlier, and he said that all nations should willingly disarm themselves in order to have global peace. But that's because no army wants to disarm themselves while other armies are armed. So every nation or country in the whole world must get along and willingly disarm themselves. And another way is global trade. So if you buy products from around the world, it makes it to where you wouldn't want a global war, because then you would be hurting businesses. Because most global businesses, besides like those who are helped by the industrial complex, they don't want their businesses being destroyed in all their countries and trade between countries to be destroyed by ongoing wars. And there's even examples of also the private armies. Like, people will say, well, what about all these tyrants around the world? There's great examples of private armies being used to stop tyrants. They just have to be careful, though, that you want to make sure that these mercs or private military contractors are being used correctly and responsibly and morally, instead of being, because a lot of mercenaries are just used to do the evil work of the warmongers in government, instead of being used to legitimately stop real tyrants and evil abroad. Hope you liked that episode. I had a little bit different organization for that. It was a little, maybe not as much as I'd like it to be organized, but the next one should be great. But I tried to make it as organized as possible, much better than the previous episodes. I tried to kind of get a nice flow for the episodes. I try to improve these episodes each time I make them. So that was Next Level Thinking, Episode 5, Militarism and War Propaganda. Please contact me at my social medias in the description of the podcast or the video if you're watching this on YouTube. If you have any comments, questions, or if you would like to be a guest on the show, please let me know.